Someone's having, someone's having a case of the Mondays. Now, any of you who read the comics might be familiar with the comic character Garfield, who is a cat. And as this famous philosopher, philosophizing theologian cat is often to do, he has these profound statements, and one of them is, "I hate Mondays." Sometimes in our lives, we have these days that just, not everything goes the way that we want it to go. And it seems like we're in a bad mood, or we're frustrated, and things that should be easy or we should be able to accomplish are just difficult just because of whatever is happening that day. When I used to live in Chicago, when I was attending seminary during football season, sometimes the Chicago Bears football team would lose on a Sunday night. And then on Monday morning, people were just meaner. They were grumpy, and I didn't have to watch the football game to know what the attitude of people were the next day on Monday morning. People were really honkety on their car horns. You knew that the Bears had lost. But there was lots of waving and smiling, then maybe the Bears had done well the Sunday before. Having a case of the Mondays is like saying that things just seem difficult today, and maybe I don't have a very good or valid reason, but I am just upset or frustrated and grumpy, and gosh darn it, you're just going to have to deal with it. When I think about this cartoon character, Garfield, I was reading a little bit about Jim Davis, the cartoon cat creator, the cartoonist who created Garfield. And I was reading an interview that he did where he explained why Garfield hates Mondays. It's pretty much a day that is the same day for any other day of the week. But Davis answers that Garfield does not have a job, Garfield does not go to school, and every day is the same. Nevertheless, every Monday is just a reminder that his life is the same old, cycling again, and for some reason, even though his life is pretty much the same every day, on Mondays specifically, awful things tend to happen to him. Garfield says, "I hate Mondays." When I read the scripture passage for today, we're looking at the second day of the week for Jesus, which happens to be Monday. And I look at what Jesus is going through and I say, someone is having a case of the Mondays here. He is not in a good mood. He, first of all, walks through Bethany and sees a fig tree. And even though it's not fig season, he curses the tree and walks away, and all the disciples are like observing this happen. And I can picture the disciples being a little like disturbed by Jesus' mood that morning. They're like, this tree doesn't even bear fruit. It's not even in season. Why is Jesus upset about that? And Jesus is all like, curse you, fig tree. And then they walk into Jerusalem. And Jesus begins this scene in which he is disrupting what is happening at the temple. So a little bit more bad mood Jesus. He's turning over tables. He's telling the leaders who are in the courtyard that they have turned God's temple into a den of robbers. And then the frames continue, as Marcus Borg and Dominic Crossan help us understand, that on the next day, we will learn next Sunday, Jesus walks by that fig tree again and sees that it has withered from Jesus' curse. So Jesus is in kind of this bad mood. And why is Jesus in a bad mood? Well, it could be that he's just having a case of the Mondays, but we do have some key pieces of scripture that's helping us understand what it is that Jesus might be frustrated about. First of all, it's not often that he has made the trip to Jerusalem. And being in Jerusalem at the height of Passover, where there are over 200,000 plus pilgrims present in the city, there's a lot of activity happening at the temple. And the temple location is to be the house of God, where one comes to receive cleansing. And we understand that people would buy birds or animals in the courtyard from money changers, because sometimes it was better than carrying those birds or animals on the pilgrimage with you. And pilgrims would be assured that when they bought these animals for sacrifice in the courtyard, they would be pure enough for the sacrifice. It would meet the requirements of the temple. And so it was a good arrangement for pilgrims to be able to do this and for the people in the courtyard of the temple to be able to sell. So it's perhaps not so clear that Jesus was upset about the actual selling of animals for sacrifice. Rather, Jesus was upset about the justice of it all, and that these merchants would often jack up the price on what these were. The exchange of money was not a really good exchange for those who had gone on pilgrimage. In other words, these merchants were taking advantage of these pilgrims. And Jesus saw a problem with that. Marcus Borg and Dominic Crossan help us better understand some of the ideas around this ritual sacrifice. It's not merely about blood sacrifice and covering an altar with blood to appease God, but rather the idea of sacrifice. The word sacrifice itself means to make sacred. So, when a pilgrim brings an offering to God, they are making a statement about what is sacred in the world. There are two types of offerings. There's a burnt offering where the animal is sacrificed and then burned, and the offering goes to God. And then there's a meal sacrifice in which the animal is sacrificed and then given back to the pilgrim so that they can eat. Our understanding of what sacrifice means, sacrifice to make sacred, might help us better understand what Jesus is trying to get at on this Monday of his. He wants us to understand that justice, making things sacred, is more important than the animals that are being killed at the altar. It's more important than what the money changers are doing and their will to make profits off of these pilgrims. Jesus wants us to return to an understanding of justice for all God's people. And that the temple is to be a place where one can come no matter who you are, no matter how rich or how poor you are, and be able to do the things that you are called to do in your faith. To become purified, to seek God's forgiveness, and receive God's mercy. Jesus is trying to help us understand that it's not just a select few people who are able to do this kind of sacrificing, but rather we are all able to do sacrificing. We are all able to make sacred. This idea of making sacred kind of continues on through our Protestant tradition, in which we believe, as Protestants, that we are all members of the priesthood of all believers. This phrase, the priesthood of all believers, means that we are in covenant with one another, and that we do not have to go through someone who is more sacred than us to receive God's blessing. All of us can go to God through prayer, through reading Scripture, through practice of justice and mercy, and find a connection with God, to find God's blessing. We are called to all be priests in the very small aspects of our lives. We are asked to find ways in which we find God's blessing and to share that blessing with others. We are all bestowed with that power of blessing and making sacred out in the world. Today is a day in which we celebrate a certain priest that has been lifted up into sainthood, this Saint Patrick. St. Patrick is known as the Apostle of Ireland, and he is kind of known as the patron saint of that little island. There's broad agreement that he was very active as a missionary in Ireland during the 5th century, and early medieval tradition credits him with being the first bishop there in the primate of Ireland. They regard him as the founder of Christianity in Ireland. According to Patrick's autobiographical account, known as the Confessio, when he was about 6 years old, a normal boy, something not so normal happened to him. He was captured by Irish pirates from his home in Britain and taken as a slave to Ireland, where he was looking after animals. By account, he lived there for 6 years before escaping and returning to his family in Britain, where he then began to study Christianity and became a cleric. He returned to Ireland and set about spreading Christianity, God's love, God's blessings to all whom he encountered. And so, as we celebrate St. Patrick's Day today, March 17th, we do so to honor the day of his death. This is celebrated inside and outside of Ireland as a cultural holiday, and the diocese in Ireland, the churches there, observe it as a solemn and holy day. It's also noted as a celebration of the very cultural aspect of being Irish in particular, which is where we get a lot of our Irish cultural traditions today, like one of our youth said, pinching one another if you're not wearing green, or kiss me, I'm Irish buttons, those kinds of things. So what does St. Patrick help us understand in this idea of the priesthood of all believers? Well, St. Patrick helped develop Christianity in Ireland, and this idea of Celtic Christianity is a really important aspect of Christianity that we want to learn about and understand. If I could describe Celtic Christianity for us, Celtic Christianity is experiential Christianity. It is coming to, for example, the ritual of communion and not fully understanding what it means to take the bread and the cup of Jesus. It doesn't mean that you fully comprehend who Jesus is or what he might mean for you in your life, but you are invited to come to the table so that through experiencing the bread and the cup, you may be able to come to better understand who Jesus is and how Jesus is connecting to you in your life. This is held in contrast with Roman Christianity, in which we might have an example of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, in which before you come to the communion table, the expectation is that you go through all the training and you have the knowledge of what it is that is happening when you take communion, when you eat the bread and drink of the cup. You have to understand and have that faith as you come to the table before you encounter it in the Roman Christian tradition. In the Celtic Christian tradition that is held in opposite, you don't need to understand what is happening. You don't have to have some sort of statement of belief or confess Christ before you come to that table. The understanding is that in encountering that table, you will come to better understand Jesus. And so we must experience Christ. We must experience all that God has to offer in order for us to know God. Celtic spirituality also teaches us about the thin places in the world. Thin places are these little cracks in the universe, in the world, in which we clearly see the kingdom of heaven. We can see God's holy divinity. Maybe it's a beam of light that comes in through the window. Sometimes when we read the Garfield cartoon, we see Garfield sitting under the window in a beam of light. Maybe it is that this philosopher and theologian, Garfield the cat, has somehow found the thin place in the world and is resting in God's holy, beloved light. The thin places are all around us. And the Irish believe that when you encounter a thin place, your soul vibrates with all that is divine. You are in holy ground. You are connected to something that is far above and beyond you. You are experiencing God and God's love. That is to say that these thin places don't exist everywhere or all over the place. It may not necessarily be that the exact spot of the pew that you are sitting in is a thin place, but there are thin places present around you. And Celtic Christianity teaches us to go out and discover those places in which we may encounter God. And maybe it's not a place, but a person. And maybe it's not a person, but maybe an idea. And maybe it's not an idea, maybe it is justice. This is why I believe that the Irish talk so much about blessings. It is not about going out into the world and understanding everything completely, but it is about being blessed in that journey. So often, Irish blessings contain something very uplifting and happy because we understand that there's so much pain and suffering in the world. So Irish blessings will offer something that is bright and jolly and cheerful in contrast with something that feels sorrowful, as a way to encourage us to look for that thin place, the place of God's divineness in a world that feels a little unjust. So here are some popular Irish blessings for you this morning. May good luck be with you wherever you go, and your blessings outnumber the shamrocks that grow. Another one. May your days be many and your troubles be few. May all God's blessings descend upon you. May peace be within you. May your heart be strong. May you find what you're seeking wherever you roam. Another one. May you have the hindsight to know where you've been, the foresight to know where you're going, and the insight to know when you're going too far. The most popular Irish blessing comes from, guess who? St. Patrick himself, and was said to be engraved on his breastplate. It's a fairly long poem, so either Patrick was a giant or was never actually written on the breastplate at all. We don't know for sure, but this idea that it was written on his breastplate is maybe to express the fact that these were ideas that were held close to his heart. It's a long poem, so I won't read it in its entirety, but here's some of the important parts of it. I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the threeness, through confession of the oneness of the Creator of creation. I arise today through the strength of heaven, the light of the sun, the radiance of the moon, the splendor of fire, the speed of lightning, the swiftness of wind, the depth of the sea, the stability of the earth, the firmness of rock. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. Another blessing to round out these wonderful blessings. Wishing you a rainbow for sunlight after showers, miles and miles of Irish smiles, for golden happy hours, shamrocks at your door, for luck and laughter too, and a host of friends that never ends, each day your whole life through. Why do we need these blessings? Because someone out there is having a case of the Mondays, and they may not understand why it is that they're in a bad mood, or for whatever reason, things just seem to be not going their way that day. We are the priesthood of all believers, and you and I are able to offer that blessing to whomever we encounter. We have the ability to offer God's holy love. That is the power of making things sacred in this world when they may not otherwise be. It is helping others see the thin place in their life where God's love and belovedness is touching them. It's reaching out and guiding them like a sunbeam into the love of God. John Dominic Crossan posted a little post this morning to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. John Dominic Crossan himself being born in Ireland and is a delightful Irish man. I've often described him as that beloved Irish grandfather you never knew you had. His warmth of speech is just delightful, and I wouldn't describe him as a little leprechaun, but his Irish accent is very, very thick, and it is just a delight to listen to. But he shared that there's many Irish out there. There's kind of this idea that the Irish saved the world. There's a book that was written that has that title. And so he posted something with a little comicness to it this morning. It's not that the Irish have saved the world, but the Irish who saved Western Christianity by adapting the desert tradition of early Christianity rather than the urban tradition of Roman Christianity. So John Dominic Crossan wants to help us understand that this Celtic Christianity is important because it gets us back to some of these early beliefs of Christianity, perhaps even what Jesus himself was trying to help us understand. It's not about knowing everything about God and telling people about that. It is about experiencing God and telling others about that experience of God. It is blessing them through words of kindness and love. We are asked to go out to the world and bless one another. There's a cartoon in which John, Garfield, the cat's owner, is sitting around at a table, and John says, "Sometimes it's good to count your blessings." And Garfield is resting his arm on the table next to John, and Garfield holds up a big wad of cat hair. And John looks back at Garfield and says, "Cat hair is not a blessing." And Garfield has this giant grin on his face, and he says, "Well, it comes in handy if you're a cat." May you feel blessed by God's belovedness. And I close with a blessing. May God give you for every storm a rainbow, for every tear a smile, for every care a promise, and a blessing in each trial. For every problem life sends, a faithful friend to share. For every sigh, a sweet song, and an answer for each prayer. May your home always be too small to hold all your friends. May God bless you now and always. Let us turn